Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today we're going to look at the Danish Gambit, a part of my Gambit series, which is going to contain more than 50 videos, which I'm going to be recording throughout the next few months. So the Danish Gambit is what you can see on the screen. White plays e4, black plays e5, and white plays the center game, and then sacrifices a full pawn with c3. This is also called the Nordic Gambit in many countries, but in English-speaking countries, I believe it's called the Danish Gambit. So what's the idea? Well, as is the case with most c3 flank pawn sacrifices, the idea is to get rapid development. If black takes that pawn, white has two options. Option number one is to simply recapture with the knight, which I should say will transpose to the Göring Gambit in the Scotch. I've made a video on that. You can find the link in the description and in the first comment below. So I'm not going to go into that into too much detail. But as you can see now, white already has a lead in development, a pawn on e4, and all black has done is black has traded off the e7 pawn for the d2 pawn or the c pawn. So that's one option. The other option is to be slightly more aggressive, and this is what I'm going to be recommending throughout this video, and play bishop c4. A two-pawn sacrifice for immediate development and having two very active bishops. Of course, black should take this pawn. That's the best way to play. And now we see that black is up two pawns, but white has extremely good bishops. There are issues connected to each and every one of black's moves. For example, moving the bishop loses the g-pawn in the exchange. Moving the knight runs into e5. Not that knight f6 is bad, but it does run into e5 and you have to be careful. So that's the idea behind c3. Black, of course, has the option to decline the gambit. And there are several ways to decline the gambit. The main one is d5. This is called the Sørensen defense. It will also most likely transpose to the Göring Gambit declined. So we take, black takes with the queen, c takes d4, and now just a normal Göring Gambit in the Scotch. And I also wanted to point out that this is very, very similar to a variation of the Scandinavian defense in which after e4, d5, takes, white doesn't go knight c3, but instead plays knight f3. This is my preferred way to play. And after bishop g4, bishop e2, black's idea is to castle queenside quickly, and white's idea is to harass that king. The only difference between this and the Sørensen defense is that white still has a c-pawn, so white has the option to go c4 in this case. If we look at the same thing from the Danish Gambit declined, d5 takes, queen takes, c takes, knight c6, knight f3, bishop g4, bishop e2, and castles queenside. Well, we don't have c4, but it's the same type of position. Okay, so when white plays the Danish Gambit, white wants rapid development, white wants to have a nice attacking game, and white is hoping black takes. I'm going to show you ideas for both sides. I'm going to show you how I would play the Danish Gambit with white, and how I would play it with black. I have also created repertoires on the Danish Gambit accepted and the Danish Gambit declined. You can find them in the first comment below, and in the description below they are on Nocti, and you can access them for free. You don't have to be a premium member. Free members have access to 10 premium games once their rating has calibrated, so you can play this repertoire out 10 times if you want. If you go premium, of course, it's unlimited. If you do, use the code hanging pawns and you will get a massive 64% discount. I will also test my repertoires against Nocti at some point. So before we go into the theory and the move orders, I want to show you a quick game. So the Danish Gambit was played in the 19th century very often, very famously. In the Romantic era of chess, this was a popular opening. It's still played today, and it's still fun, especially on our level, below Grandmaster level. But in the 19th century, people played it like a serious opening. So this is the game between Hans Linden and Ladislas Maciuski, in which Maciuski took the opportunity to take the pawn, bishop c4, which is what I recommend for white, and cb, which is what I actually recommend for black, bishop b2. And Maciuski went bishop b4, which is one of the three moves. You can play knight f6, bishop b4, or d5. Now, knight d2 is a bad move. even though it keeps the bishop open and it looks still on g7, you are going to run into several pins. And once this knight comes out to e4, once this bishop comes out to g4, you're going to have a hard time defending this position. So in the game, Linden played knight c3, which is correct. Knight f6 played, okay? And now queen b3 and an attack on f7 was fine. A double attack on the bishop and on the pawn. So queen b3 forces bishop c3 was the best move. But Linden played knight e2, which is okay. And in this position, black lost the game in a single move. The normal way to play this is to just, you know, continue, castle, take on c3, play d6, do something to develop. Black took on e4. And it increases the pressure on c3, but not enough. And now the knight is hanging after white castles. If the knight goes back, that was a clear loss of tempo. So takes, knight takes. Now, if black castles, there is queen g4, and there's going to be a ton of trouble along the diagonal. You're going to lose, and g7 is hanging. So bishop c3, bishop c3. Once again, on castles, it's game over. I just go queen g4 and you resign, because g6 loses to queen d4, mate. So queen g5 played. And in this position, rook e1, misplacing the king, was played, king d8. You cannot really go king f8. If you go king f8, there is bishop b4 check. And on d6, of course, bishop takes d6, and the queen takes, and it's mate. So, yeah, on queen g5, rook e1, king d8, f4 was played. I mean, I don't really know what to recommend. If you play queen c5 check, trying to win the bishop, I can just go bishop d4, and if you take my bishop, then I take on g7. I don't know, let's say you try to save your rook, then bishop f6 is checkmate. That's the whole idea, removing the g-pawn of the board to checkmate the king. So on f4, black took on f4. Once again, bishop f6, bishop g7 trying to mate on f6, rook g8, and queen g4 was played. This should have been the final move of the game. It wasn't. If queen takes queen, then bishop f6 mate, of course. So queen d6 defending f6. Bishop f6 anyway, just picking up the rook, and it's mate after queen takes rook. So this is the type of position you can expect to get from the Danish Gambit on like low, intermediate levels, and even, I mean, I would say I'm intermediate to advanced. People make mistakes. Now, let's have a look at the Danish Gambit Accepted. Now, as I said, I've created two repertoires, one for the Danish Gambit Accepted, one for the Danish Gambit Declined. You can find them in the description in the comment below. So e4, e5, d4 takes, c3 takes. As I said, knight c3 is not my preferred way to play this position. It's the engine choice. It's about minus 0.4, whereas bishop c4, which I do recommend, is about minus 0.6, which is a negligible difference. And also, this transposes to the Gering Gambit in the Scotch. Knight c6, knight f3, bishop b4. Once again, you can see the video on the Gering Gambit if you want, and I covered this in detail. But since I don't recommend that you play this with either side, actually, so excuse me, with white, we're going to leave this as it is. White should go bishop c4. This plays into the spirit of the opening, and you're threatening to do stuff on f7. If something like knight c6 is played, then we don't have queen b3 immediately, although we could play it because there are defenses. But, you know, you're not taking the pawn, so white at some point is going to take. Not that knight c6 is the losing move or anything, but black really should take the pawn, and I'll explain why. Bishop takes. So you can take that pawn very safely, and black is better in all these lines, but black has to know what to do. Black has to know the move orders, or there is going to be more than enough compensation for the two pawns. In fact, the most common move here at the start of the accepted Danish Gambit loses all of black's advantage. Most people play d5, and d5 just gives the pawn back and leaves white with a massive position. In fact, from this position here, black plays d5 because they want a forced draw. If they make a mistake here, they could lose. So one way to play is to go for a forced draw, knight f6. And this is a very, very simple draw. You take on f7, king takes f7, you win the queen temporarily, but now bishop b4, and you block with the queen. Bishop takes d2, knight takes d2. The material is even. White has a slight edge in development, but black has a 3-1 majority. So this should be equal. I would take black if I had to choose, but it's zeros. On a high level, this is just a draw. On our level, of course, anyone can win, and it can be a draw. After bishop d5, they can also play the move bishop b4 check. And now white is significantly better. The reason white is better is the move knight d2, which in this position actually works. You're not in time to play knight f6. Knight f6 simply loses the bishop because our bishop is on d5, and we always have this trick with queen a4 winning the bishop on b4. So bishop b4 is an extremely bad move. The best move, I think, is f6, which doesn't lose the bishop, but it's still very, very bad. In this position, if we go queen a4, there actually is c6, and it's a double attack. But after f6, we would go queen h5, and on g6, just drop the queen back to e2, threatening queen b5 in some positions, and black's structure is ruined. The alternatives to knight d2, as I said, are knight f6, and now just queen a4. And of course, if you play c6 in this position, then I throw in bishop takes f7, king f7, and queen b4. Your king is misplaced, it's completely naked, and white should be better. And if instead on knight d2 you play knight e7, then it's even worse. Bishop takes f7, king f7, and queen b3, once again picking up the bishop. So if you choose to go for d5, go for the draw line with knight f6 and allow bishop takes f7. If you go bishop b4, you are going to lose. Now, what are some good moves for black? Good moves are knight f6 and bishop b4. We saw in the Linden Machuski game that bishop b4 was played, and that's a fine move. Again, white shouldn't go knight d2 here. White should go knight c3. Excuse me. Knight f6, and now queen b3. Queen b3 puts pressure on f7, puts pressure on the bishop, so it forces bishop c3. Bishop c3, and black simply castles. And there isn't enough pressure in this position. There just isn't. If you turn on the engine, it's going to say minus 1.4, so black has a significant advantage, and white should play something like f3. Of course, black can still make a mistake, but very, very close to a safe position. And so this is a good choice. The best choice, in my opinion, is knight f6. Now, you may be wondering, well, why play knight f6? It runs into e5. You can actually safely go back to g8. White should go e5, hoping that black blunders. These two moves simply drop the knight. Knight e4 is a losing blunder once again because of bishop f7, a very common tactic. King f7 and queen f3, picking up the knight. So here white, of course, is better because the king has been misplaced. This bishop is great. But after knight f6, e5, black can go back to g8. And this is now a bunch of pawns, 2 pawns for the initiative, let's call it that, and for a lead in development. But if black isn't careful, if they don't develop in time, well, they're going to be losing this position. So the engine says plus 0.7 here. If you go bishop b4 here first, and then bishop c3, and then queen e7, this is also fine. This is minus 0.4. So this is slightly better, although knight g8 is still playable. You should go for this if you want to remember a ton of lines. So on queen e7, white really has to defend the pawn on e5 because the pawn is pinned, so you play queen e2. And now knight g8. This is the superior version because black has thrown in a couple of developing moves, and moving the knight back to g8 is no big deal because the knight is coming out to h6. So once again, after bishop takes b2, I would recommend that you play knight f6. On e5, you can go knight g8, but playing bishop b4 first is more precise. Bishop b4. Knight c3 is a mistake. So I'll show you why. We said bishop c3. If knight c3, then d5. And you're not in time to take the knight on f6. If you take on f6, then queen f6. And there is double pressure on the pinned knight on c3. So the best move, I think, is to play bishop b5 check, which runs into c6, and now you simply drop a piece. Either one of them. Knight e2 is best, and now just takes on b5. And this is a big advantage to black. So instead on bishop b4, white plays bishop c3. But now we use this pin on the pawn here and on the bishop here. The bishop isn't really defending the pawn. So queen e2. Now the pawn threatens to take on f6, so knight g8. Knight f3, knight h6. And this is very, very solid for black. Black has a slight advantage, so white has some compensation for the pawns, but definitely not enough. Something like rook e1, knight c6. I mean, who wouldn't take black here? Black is almost fully developed. Almost. White does have two pawns, but that really isn't enough. So this is my recommendation for black. Still, if we have white here, it's minus 0.5. It's a playable position. If this is the worst thing you're risking, then go for it by all means. So that's the accepted Danish Gambit. I would recommend that you do that with white. Play bishop c4, allow black to fully accept the gambit, and then if they go d5, you take it. If they go bishop b4, you go knight c3. If they go knight f6, you go e5, and these three moves are mistakes. The best move is bishop b4, and so on and so on. So now we're going to play a game against Nocti in the Danish Gambit accepted. I've imported the repertoire, so it's going to know what to do, but I wonder what it will do. Okay, let's play a game against Nocti in the Danish Gambit. So as you can see, I've imported two different repertoires, the accepted and declined repertoires. Let's play a game in the accepted Gambit. I want to play white. Let's make it a blitz game, and let's do rook 1. Okay, I think this is about 1900 FIDE. So yeah, since I'm playing a bad opening, let's do this. Let's play. Okay, d4. Good. Okay, interesting. c3. Bishop c4. Takes. Nice. Okay, knight c3, of course. Knight f6. Let me just try to remember. Okay, I'm playing queen b3 immediately. Bishop c3 is forced. It's playing the best line. It's playing the best line. Okay, f3 is best, but this is already a disadvantage to white. Still, let's try to beat Nocti. I know that f3 is the best move. You can see that it gives me instant feedback, but I knew that f3 was best. Okay, how do I develop? I want my knight on f5 or maybe on g5. Let's go knight e2 for now. Okay, I'm gonna castle because it makes no sense not to castle. Chases my queen away, fine. I don't like this, it's challenging my bishop. I may have to take. Yeah, this is no good. This is no good, but we have to take. Okay, now, do I have a way to put pressure on e6? No, I don't. So let's play rook d1 first. It's an okay move. Queen e7. I want to go a4, a5, a6, but I'm not sure it accomplishes much. Can I play e5? e5 seems interesting. e5, knight d5 takes, e5 takes, bishop takes. That's interesting. That undefends the knight at least. I'm gonna try e5. I have to play aggressively. Okay. I should save my bishop. The knight could come to b4, but that seems okay because I'll have queen c3. Blunder? Oh no! Undefended e3. No! Okay, we keep fighting. We keep fighting. No, I just allow the fork now. Ah, oh, Jesus, knight a4. No. Yeah, I'm resigning. No, I got destroyed. I got destroyed. But okay, Nocti was playing my repertoire. I taught it how to play the best moves. Yeah. Ah, this was awful. Okay, so this is what I do when I want to test an opening. If you want to do that, link in the description. Let's go back to the video. Okay, and to finish this, I'm going to show you some declined lines. So if e4, e5, d4, ed, c3. I've already mentioned that there are two ways to decline the gambit. d5 transposes to the Goring gambit. So d5, ed5, queen d5, cd4. It's going to be an IQP position, which is interesting and equal. But if I had to choose, I would take white here because I like playing with an IQP and I think white's position is slightly more aggressive. If you're going to be declining the gambit, I would recommend that you play queen e7. I don't think this has a name. I've imported it as a different repertoire on Nocti called Danish Gambit Declined. You can also study this. But queen e7 is a very, very strong move because it puts pressure on e4. And white's best is to take on d4, queen takes e4, and bishop e3, defending the pawn and stopping the check. But now black has very, very rapid development. Bishop b4 check, knight c3. Knight f6, of course threatening knight d5, forking knight and bishop. So knight f3, knight d5. The only way to defend is queen d2. But now knight takes e3 and fe3. And this structure isn't ideal. White is also down a pawn. And the queen is attacked, black's queen, so black has to move the queen. If black castles, then we take the queen and win a piece. So queen e7, something like bishop d3, d5, castles, knight d7. Why is black up a pawn? I don't know. I would take black here every single time. Of course, white's pieces are slightly better placed. d5 is going to be safe until c6 is played, but c6 is going to be played. There could be some trouble on h7 or on f7, but I don't think it's enough. So if you want a safe game against the Danish Gambit, try queen e7. Another thing I would like to mention, just to end things, d3 is a bad move. This is a common way to decline some gambits, but in this case, white just takes with the bishop, and why did you give the pawn back? So the Danish Gambit is very interesting. It's good for blitz repertoires, but on anything below, I would say 2000 FIDE level, this could work in tournament games as well. And it's a very, very interesting opening. Let me know what you think. Follow the links if you want to try it out by yourself. And yeah, see you in the next one. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.